So I was in the break room earlier from work, just taking my 15, playing some solitaire, and I had a coworker come in. She's an older baby boomer, probably in her 60s. Long white hair, a little bit of a round lady, and she's talking about how there was a neighbor at her house that was making a very loud commotion, and that it's not the first time that she's encountered something very loud and obnoxious with this neighbor. And so she's describing about how the neighbor was neglecting his dogs and screaming at his kids. And so I asked, like, okay, well, what's going on with the situation? And so she goes on to say that the kids are basically no older than 5. They couldn't be. They're 2 boys, and couldn't be any older than 3 or 5. And basically, the father of the children is screaming at the top of his lungs, "Get the fuck back inside the house," and stuff like that. "What are you doing? You're being crazy. You're not supposed to be playing in the fucking street." Just very loud obscenities, and most likely drunk, as you can tell by the language I'm using to describe the situation. But this coworker of mine, she was obviously very distressed having to describe the situation. But for me, this was just very normal. So I straight up told her, "That's normal. That's normal." At first, she couldn't believe what I just said. She's like, "You're saying that's normal?" But I had to clarify that what I meant by normal is that it's very common to grow up this way, to grow up being abused emotionally, physically, in case of myself and other people I've talked to, sexually. And just it's your parents, it could be your grandparents, it could be other parental figures, it could be teachers. That's what I meant by normal. It's just dysfunction is all around us, and it's a part of the culture now. And as much as we don't like to admit it, as much as we like to sort of hide behind the curtain and say like, "Oh, it's not there." If I just adjust my attitude about it, maybe I can hide it. It's a part of our DNA. It's a part of our customs. It's a part of our rituals. And it's just something that we have to confront and address and talk about. And so that's kind of something I want to talk about in this video. In my response to Collective Dismal, I talked about my own suffering and my own abuse from my father. But I neglected to mention the fact that my father was a victim. My father was abused by his father. That my grandfather on my dad's side of the family was also abused by his mother. How his mother was a severe alcoholic who would drink hard liquor and would eventually die when my grandfather was very, very young. So my grandfather's coping mechanism was just to drink and to get as much sex as possible. He took pride in his work, and through that he also neglected his own children. My father went through a lot of trauma at the hands of his father. He was abused emotionally. He was neglected. His father got drunk a lot and would verbally abuse him. So my father did not learn how to love. My father did not learn how to be emotionally vulnerable. He would learn how to drink. He would learn how to only be expressive through alcohol. He would adapt his father's narcissistic behavior. My father, much like his father, would take a lot of pride in his work. And just like his father, my dad would blame everyone else but himself for his problems. Low impulse control, lack of reasoning, low inhibition. My father, in essence, was not prepared to have a child, but, at the end of the day, he did, and I ended up coming out. And my dad's wounds are still there. My dad's wounds, are still within him. And the problem is that he represses them. He never wants to talk about them. He never wants to tackle them in the way that would heal him emotionally or spiritually. I do believe that a lot of men are socially conditioned to repress emotional trauma, physical or sexual trauma, in a sense that they believe that if they were to heal from it, that it would mean that they're weak. That merely addressing their issues within the inside, or even believing that they have any trauma, means that they're somehow less masculine, or somehow weak. And I think that because this happens, there is a lot of unnecessary damage that happens to our sons, that happens to our boys, where they also, in turn, don't know how to regulate emotion. They don't know how to socialize. They don't know how to be vulnerable or to express themselves or how to love. My mom had a similar upbringing. Her dad would get drunk and call her names like stupid or idiot and just degrade her, emotionally neglect her. My mom would tell me stories about how grandpa was very controlling and very, manipulative in a sense. So she tells me that one day, I think one of the uncles of the family would come in and would compliment my grandma, her mom. And so my grandfather didn't take very kindly to that. And so when he realized that someone else had complimented my grandmother, he would get drunk and he'd violently attack him, threaten him with a knife. So this was a man that viewed his wife as property and did not basically controlled every element of her life and the life of his kids. So that's a I don't know how to classify that type of abuse, but it's very manipulative and it's very controlling, to where you can't have any responsibility or any type of influence over your own life. It's a very type of trauma that's very specific, that I haven't really dug into, but it does impact my mom's life, and it does impact the life of my aunts and my grandmother. And I've heard people talk about generational trauma. I've heard people talk about how they have to leave their parents. They have to force themselves to leave family members because that's the only way that they can get out of generational trauma. Because they don't realize until it's too late that their parents were narcissists or their parents were abusing them in some way. And so the only way to fight back is just to completely cut off from them. There's a trend on TikTok where the children of alcoholic parents or the children of narcissistic parents are speaking out and they're saying, "This is what my mom or my dad did to me, and here's my story, and here's everything laid out. Here's what they did to me, and this is why I left." Throughout all my high school years and throughout the times I've been to college and times the various work places I've worked at, I've met all kinds of people that have shared stories with me that were not very surprising when they talked to me about their abuse, when they talked to me about how they called the cops on their parents, how a parent beat them, how a parent was neglectful, or a parent was yelling and screaming at them, or whatever. And when they would recite these stories to me, they would tell me these stories in a very casual manner, as if to say, like, hey, this happened to me too, and they weren't crying, they weren't telling these stories to me in a very dramatic fashion. No, we were just sharing these stories in a way where it's like, yeah, I understand what you're going through because I've been there and that's happened to me too. That's why I say dysfunctional families are the new normal. As for why it's the case, to be honest, I just think it's a lot of parents just should not be parents. I'm not arguing eugenics. I'm not saying the state should get involved. I'm not trying to make some sort of regulation argument or whatever. But there are a lot of people, if you look at the RK selection theory, that should not be reproducing, that are giving in to their sexual desires when they really should not be doing that. And the thing is, I don't know if I've mentioned this on my YouTube channel before, but I get told all the time, just go to therapy. It's like I've been prescribed Zoloft, which is an antidepressant. But I'm not, as I mentioned before, an antidepressant can't help with the material needs of depression, right? An antidepressant can't help with the fact that I work a minimum wage job, the fact that I'm a janitor. It can't help with the fact that I'm unattractive. It can't help with the fact that I see the economic landscape that we're in and that it's basically hopeless at this point, right? So what's a pill gonna do? It's gonna suppress some thoughts that I have that make me even more depressed, or it's gonna suppress some suicidal ideation that I might have. As far as therapy goes, I mean, it might help, but how do I know the therapist is actually invested in helping me? I can't afford to pay $100 a session, last I checked, even if, I cover my own insurance, you know? So how does it actually benefit me, to seek out that type of treatment, you know? The best therapy I can get is talking to online friends on Discord and Telegram that actually do have my interests, in mind, that actually share some ideas that I have and actually do care about what I have to say and actually are curious about how I am doing and how, my life is and stuff like that, that genuinely are interested about myself and where I am going in my life. I'm not saying therapy is a scam. If you think it's good for you, go ahead and try it, but for me, it doesn't solve systemic issues. The biggest problem I have is that everyone thinks that these are all individualistic issues rather than, looking at what we're going through and addressing the wide ranging systemic issues that create trauma, that create depression, that create abuse. This is going to be an unpopular opinion, and this is just my speculation, but I do think that there is a correlation between labor, particularly blue collar work, and substance abuse. I think that the more stress there is with labor, for example, instead of working 8 hours, you work a 12-hour shift, and say instead of 5 days, you work 6 days. You take that person, and they're going to need more substances, to de stress, to unwind from their workday. That in turn leads to that person partaking in even more substance abuse, so they're going to need more alcohol or more marijuana to unwind from the day because they're enduring so much labor. A lot of my family has a very blue collar background. Construction was big in our family, but a lot of these construction workers also drank on the job, and there were a lot that when they drank, they would also drink and drive. Going back to my father, when he was younger and he was working construction, which he took a lot of pride in, he would drink, to excess, and he would get multiple DUIs. His drinking was so bad that he would have alcohol-induced epilepsy. So he would start having seizures until the point that he would no longer be allowed to work construction. It put him in risk of his life. That in turn affected my life because he would take it out on me because he didn't have a proper coping mechanism. He didn't know how to turn around his life, for the better. He didn't know how to put down the bottle. He didn't have an outlet in any other way, so he just took it out on me and my sister and just would abuse us, unfairly, but that's how, it went. And that's part of the reason, why I never can take seriously the advice of just get into the trades. Just get into the trades, bro. You can make good money there. Just be a truck driver. Just work construction. Because I know the type of people that work those jobs. I see them all the time. I've worked with them at different places. I've met them all the time, and they're all the same. They're all the same, and I don't want to be like them. Frankly, I'm not so sure I could really end up like them if I was to get a trade job. I'm not trying to denigrate them. I'm not trying to say they're bad people. But I've always been an outcast. I've always been a different person ever since, I was in middle school. I've always had my head buried in books. I've always been interested in very niche topics that your average tradie or your average retail worker or whatever just were never interested in or had never thought about. Why do you think I'm on YouTube? Why do you think, I have a blog? Why do you think, I'm on the internet? I do think that growing up in a dysfunctional family and experiencing what I have shaped me into the person that I am. I remember talking to my priest, crying during a private confession that I never wanted to end up like my father. I never wanted to end up like the people that hurt me, the people that hurt me physically, the people that hurt me emotionally, the people that hurt me sexually. And he blessed me and he prayed that the generational trauma would come to an end and it would end with me. Now, is it possible to reverse it? I don't know. I don't know if my parents would ever change. I don't know if the people that hurt me have a capacity to change. It could be possible that they're just stuck there forever in their mindset because not just their age, but their behavior is just permanent. But broadly speaking, I think this is a cultural issue. Instead of addressing this bottom up, I think we need to address this top down. This is going to be more than just a family issue. This is going to be a wider cultural issue. We have to address first the family, then the community, then the state, and then the wider society, the nation that we live in. How did we get to a point to where abuse was so normalized in our culture? How did we get to a point to where mothers are just like, oh, your father, that's just how he is, and we tiptoe around the subject and don't actually address the substance of the issue at hand? Look, I can't say I know for certain. I can't say I have a full answer or a grasp on the situation. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure it out what it is that went on in my life and what others are going through and how it all relates together. I do believe that there are patterns. I do believe that there's a lack of unity, divorce, substance abuse. I do believe that there's a lot of a lack of coping mechanisms plays a part in it. So you put all these chemicals in this mixture together, and you end up with a poison. Some people, of course, come up with the wrong conclusion, which is toxic masculinity, which is understandable to a point, but the root of the issue is something else entirely that we still haven't quite figured out just yet. And as I mentioned in a previous video, yeah, it's totally understandable that someone from this type of environment does end up in a weird sexualized community where they end up thinking that they're a gay furry. Because it's that type of community that seems more welcoming, seems more loving, when really it's just a perversion, it's an eroticization of love. I think a lot of these predators in the LGBT community are fully aware that these kids, these teens, are in abusive households and take advantage of that. And it makes complete sense as to why I'm here. It makes so much sense as to why everyone nowadays seems so terminally online. It's not confusing as to why we have such a high rate of mental illness. It's not so confusing as to why people are drawn to the allure of political extremes on the radical left and the radical right. They want to belong to something that can welcome them, that can take them away from the abuse and the harms that the real world has. But that's it. I know it's pretty short. I have a new article that I'm writing. It's about a quarter of the way done. And once it's done, I'm going to have a video where I read it out loud as a script and I publish it. So I don't know how long the video itself will be, but once I got the article done, it'll be up on the blog, and I'll link to it on the description page. So that'll be done pretty soon, hopefully within the next week. I got some family plans and obligations this week I got to attend to. But other than that, I mean, work, it's not too busy. And then I got my next semester of school coming in the fall. So other than that, I'm not too busy. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video.